So today, BU Evolution, we're with Simon Hinton. Hi, Simon.
Hi, Anthony. Nice to be here.
Nice to see you too. Now, I don't fully know how to describe you. I mean, I've known you for a few years as a businessman, an entrepreneur, with roots deeply in spirituality. So how would you describe yourself?
Well, I think the problem is that with anything, and I think we live in a world where people like to compartmentalise.
Right.
And, I'm sort of the opposite of that in a way, because I've lived a very colourful and rich life and done so many different things. So there is a kind of a word for it called the Renaissance man, which, I always think of someone like Dr. John Dee, who was, Elizabeth I's astrologer, who was, a man of science, and a man of the esoteric. And I suppose in a way that's what I'm like. I like to go to the football, I love science, I'm interested in acquiring new information and knowledge, and my heart is very much in the esoteric and transformational technology to help us move to the most powerful person we can be. So it goes right across the board really, and so the word Renaissance works for me.
Right, and perhaps colourful and explorer, perhaps we can throw.
Well, if you want to, I'm happy with that. Ring.
Okay, good. We talked about BU Evolution, and the launch of BU Evolution is about sort of people's own journey. And it's about sharing, not telling anybody what they do. So obviously we connected because I've seen you've done some great transformations in your life for yourself. And I think it's worth sharing to our viewers about, your own journey and what you've done for your own kind of personal well-being.
Well, thank you. That's very nice to hear. I think when I look back, I think, certainly growing up, I was born in the 60s, growing up in the 70s and 80s, still growing up, we go through these different stages of learning, and I really didn't have, when I look back on my life, I really didn't have any kind of guidance from any peers really of any note, certainly in my first sort of 20 to 30 years. So it was all just an adventure trying to work out a puzzle with very little tools to do it. And looking back, I sort of managed to get where I am, but I made lots of mistakes, tripped up a lot. I'm not saying that was all bad, because we learn the most from, when we make mistakes, so we get feedback. But I went through all these different processes, and, looking back, it would have been nice if I'd had one or two good mentors or peers in those early days. It would have helped cut out a lot of stuff.
Right.
So in a way, that's what I do. I help people. I'd never tell them what to do. That's not what it's about. But if people are open and ready for transformation, then I can share with them things that have worked for me and for others that have worked with me.
Fantastic.
And in sharing those key things and guiding them if they want it, then I can help them cut out a lot of pain and cut to the point. It's just like anybody, a coach, you might be a young David Beckham, but the rough diamond with innate abilities, but it takes a good coach or a set of different coaches over the years to get the best out of people and to help them, find their true potential. So that's really what I do. I help people live an authentic life, and I do that from my own experience. I've had a lot of experience, and a lot of funny things happen to me. It's not all perfect. I don't say I have all the answers, but I know a little bit of stuff, and I enjoy helping people.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. And so what kind of made you turn towards, self-help and helping yourself particularly? I know you described, obviously, you had quite a colourful upbringing with no sort of peer guidance, but was there kind of a pivotal moment in your life where you thought, I've got to try maybe we could say an alternative way? And if so, one thing that set you on the journey and why?
Yes, that is a whole story. It's a whole book, to be honest.
Right.
There's been a whole series of epiphany moments in the last 30 plus years, which I could share a couple of them if you want me to. As far as helping others is concerned, it's funny how sometimes we do things and we don't realise our own power. We don't realise always how we are helping others until many years later. Recently on Facebook I had somebody coming up to me and who I hadn't seen in over 30 years and saying, I was a pivotal person in her life, and it was like 1983 when I hadn't learned anything about self-development consciously, but apparently I came out with some gems of truth for her and really helped her. I had no idea. So in a way, I think I was always sort of on the path of communicating ideas and shooting from the hip, if you like. Got me into a bit of trouble here and there because I was pretty direct. And I've learned to sort of temper that to some extent because it's important to have rapport with people. But there was something that happened to me in 1987. I mean, I grew up in a very fundamentalist religion called Jehovah's Witnesses, and I made a mistake of throwing the baby out with the bathwater and rejecting that religion, but also rejecting anything spiritual or beyond the veil of perception. So I had this very Aristotelian view. And then in 1987, I went to Egypt, and I went inside the Great Pyramid in Egypt. And at that particular time, I had a sort of an awakening, really. At the time, I wasn't sure what it was, but I became telepathic. When I left that pyramid, I got very, very telepathic with my partner at the time. I was able to put numbers into her head and do all this sort of stuff. And what that did was it just woke me up to the fact that there is much more than we can see or perceive through our cognitive apparatus. It sort of woke me up to that fact. And from that point on, I sort of had a much more open mind about things that were not easily distinguished, compartmentalized, or measurable in simplistic terms. And it carries on. The story carries on.
No, it's a good story. It's fascinating.
Several years later, I had an automatic Kundalini awakening. So this happened in 87. 6 years later, in 93, I had a automatic Kundalini experience. I went to see a psychic, and she said to me that I needed to study the Kabbalah, that all the psychics around her had asked who I was, that there was a young magician, not the Paul Daniels type, but a young magician in her midst, and and as a result of that, I did start studying the Kabbalah, joining several magical orders, and starting to build and learn to develop personal power, because my life was a mess. Things were going wrong. I had the sex and drugs and rock and roll. I had a lot of fun. It was great fun, but it did start to go a bit wonky. And I realised, there was a lot of toxic things around me, and I wanted to have personal power and build my personal strength up. So I started to study the esoteric, do magical rituals, join magical orders, study the Kabbalah, and then several years later, a very important thing happened to me about 5 years after that, is I actually started to study Reiki. And I realised I had these healing abilities. I've been mentioned a couple of times before, but they really came to the fore after one day of attunement when I did Reiki 1 way back in 98. And then shortly after I did Reiki 2, then Reiki Master level. And from then on, basically, I started teaching people. And in 2001, I had my first healing centre in Notting Hill. That became very, very busy very quickly. And people literally would be at parties or different places and come to me for help and assistance. And I was able to do stuff to them. And I was able to get insight that was outside my own cerebral memory and outside my own experience. I was able to get insight beyond. So I was able to get messages to help them or to suggest to them things that they might want to try or change or do. Not preaching, but just sharing stuff that was coming to me. And they found that to be incredibly helpful, and my reputation grew very quickly from that.
I mean, I see that
I was somebody that could do stuff.
And you've got quite a following now, if I'm right.
Well, we live in a world of social media. I've got hundreds of thousands of people who follow me on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and the rest of it. But, what does that actually mean at the end of the day? It's whether you can actually deliver. Anyone can build up followings if they focus their attention on that.
Shows a bit of credibility. I mean, certainly the people I've spoken to, and know you well, say, that you're the real deal, and, you obviously exude a hell of a lot of energy.
Well, thank you.
And you look amazing, if I may just drop that in.
Well, thank you very much.
So you're obviously doing something right, which is why I think our viewers would like to sort of hear about what you're
Well, there is a lot of stuff, and we have a short interview here, so I can't go into it all. But what I can say very briefly is that lots and lots of esoteric work, discipline, self-development, and finding teachers of credibility, and very hard to find. I found it very difficult to find anyone of any note. So I read thousands of books at one stage in my life, tried to understand and make the best of it, started to do magical practice, magical discipline, meditation, Reiki, Qigong, you name it, I have done it. And I really dedicated myself, and it really had an effect, and it strengthened my personal power. It strengthened my ability to communicate, to understand people. Also, the life that I've had, working in the music business, in PR, working as a journalist for GQ, Financial Times, property development. I've done so many different things, but that's given me an insight into the human condition. I've met so many different types of people, from gangsters to presidents of countries. I've worked with governments. I've done so many different types of things. And, you know, at the end of the day, we're all people. And I'm a people person. I like people and I'm fascinated by them, whether young, old. My life is enriched by the different types of people that I know. I've never limited myself to one particular type of person to hang out with or mix with. I draw my inspiration from human beings and their different types of experiences. And similarly, that's given me an insight to help others who are struggling, stuck with some issue, whether it's financial, physical, emotional, relationship, whatever it might be, and to give them some basic, simple principles that if they apply them, they can shift their reality. And on top of that, and this is kind of quite key, if you want me to carry on.
Yeah, no.
Okay. Okay, there's something very, very, very interesting and unusual happened to me on the 21st of February 2013. When I was approached by I had an unusual circumstances, interaction with two superluminal beings, or angels, okay, I call them. And what happened is, in 2012, I set up my clinic, Light Therapy Revolution, where I basically help people physically, mentally, emotionally with right frequency, light therapy, hands-on healing, psychic surgery, Reiki, Karuna, the rest of it. Loads and loads of different modalities I've incorporated into quantum combination treatments. Okay, so I had a clinic in Covent Garden, and I remember this particular week it got very, very cold in the clinic, like ridiculously cold, even though it wasn't that cold outside and the place was well heated. And as a result of that, I was like, you know, sort of perplexed really, what on earth is going on? And at the time I was living in somebody's house in Richmond, because I'd split up with my partner. I was going through quite a lot of personal difficulties. I was staying at a friend's house in Richmond, and she was a bit of a shaman kind of person, and she said to me, something very strange has happened today. They've dug up some lead burial tombs in a church in Kingston, and the only people that were buried in lead burial tombs were the Knights Templars. And I think you should go down and see it, Simon. I said, well, I'm really busy. Do I have to go, Joe? And she said, yes, I do. Now, the thing is, I'd always had this sort of insight that I'd been a Knights Templar in a past life. I'd always had this strong resonance with the Knights Templars. So I said, okay, I'll make the time, I'll go down. So I went down there and I walked into this church. I noticed there was a couple of ley lines that were blocked, because I'm very sensitive to things like that. I'm very psychic, tuned into land and stuff like that. And that's come over time. It hasn't happened immediately. It's come over time with practice. Anyway, I was able to clear these ley lines, and then suddenly I got this download, a 5-pointed star download in my legs and arms and back. And it was just, have you seen the new Avengers film?
I haven't.
It's a great movie. It's a little bit like that. Okay. They've got the most amazing graphics in it. I was literally beamed into.
I shall immediately.
Christ. I was like, what the hell is this? I didn't know. It was very strong. And literally I was almost like wiped out. I said, Joe, I've got to get back. I've got to get the hell out of here. So I went back to the house in Richmond, and she was sitting in the living room and I was sitting in the kitchen. I walked past her, and as I walked past her, the temperature dropped about 10 or 15 degrees. It was massive coldness. I said, I don't know what the hell's happening here, but something's happening and I'm going to find out what the hell is going on. So that's what I did. The next thing I did was do something I don't normally do, Anthony, and I went into a trance mediumship state. So I'm not a trance medium. I don't describe myself as that, but I was able to go in, and what actually happened is I completely lost consciousness. I cannot remember a damn thing. I swear, I cannot remember anything. Fortunately, the flatmate Joe was recorded the whole thing, and what happened is two superluminal beings came through me, and they said, we come from somewhere so outside of the Earth's astral ambience, so far away we find it very, very difficult to communicate with any human being on the planet. But we think we can with you, Simon, because you have an ability we call hyper rapport. But they didn't give me any sort of glowing testimonials. They said, no, to be honest, for us it's like throwing one on the black. You know, you're a bit of a loose cannon as far as we're concerned, a bit emotional, but we're going to try. We're going to have a go. So, and they said to me they had a job for me to do, they wanted me to do, and the job was, they described as cleaning the timelines. Now, in the context of that narrative, Anthony, I didn't know what on earth they were talking about. But the next day, some unusual things started happening. So the next day, the Pope resigned, which was unusual, and these Cathars, reincarnated Cathars, started to pour into my clinic, which was in Covent Garden.
Can you
at the
explain
time.
what a cathar?
Yeah, sure. In the late 11th century, 10th, 11th century, in the Languedoc region of the south of France, emerged a growing group of Gnostic Christians who were very much following the original teachings of the Christ and the Magdalena, in particular, Mary Magdalene. Okay, because what happened in the 3rd century, this is historically recorded, but in the 3rd century AD, the bishops of Nicaea went to Constantine, the Emperor Constantine, who was the ruler at the time, the head of the Roman Empire, and said, look, Christianity's been, you can be killed for being a Christian. It's not working. The growth of Christianity is too much. We've got to do something about this. So they presented him with a political solution, which was to nationalise Christianity and incorporate it with the earlier pagan traditions into a single effective religion. Everything else you couldn't be. And that's how the Roman Catholic Church was born. So that occurred in the 3rd century. Now, 600-700 years later, this Catholic Church had become incredibly corrupted. And these people were actually connected to the original Gnostic teachings of the Christ. And the earlier teachings, because Christ was one of a long line of Essenes, as far as I can see anyway, Jewish travellers, and they connected to those teachings and came along with something called the Church of Love. And the Church of Love is that actually you can recognise people who are connected to the Church of Love, not by their words, not by their flowery deeds, but by the nature of who they were. The loving, kind, compassionate healers that these people were. So this simple Gnostic tradition grew very quickly, the victim of its own success actually. And subsequently they were known and referred to as Cathars, which was from the Greek word katharos, which means pure. They were very pure, natural. They generally didn't eat meat, they had fish and vegetables, and they were healers, and they worked with that. They had no political agenda, so they didn't have some massive church, or they were kind of low church in a way. But they followed the pure Gnostic teachings of Christ, and they just lived their lives in harmony with the land. So very lovely people. And they spread quickly from the south of France to parts of northern Italy, Spain, and even the United Kingdom. Eventually, the Catholic Church said, considered them a threat to their orthodoxy, so they enacted a terrible genocide. The world's first proper genocide. Actually, it was in a way, it was a precursor.
Which period is this? Did you say
1208 to 1244? Right. 1 million men, women, and children were murdered, tortured, and the whole of south of France was decimated. And the way they operated, unfortunately, it's a horrible parallel, was very, very, very similar to Nazi Germany. Even the things that they used to do, they used to mark them with certain clothes, tattoos, the rest of it, and that's the same way that they did in Nazi Germany. It was a genocide against a very pure, loving people. Now, what subsequently came to my mind, it's a very long story, it's going to be categorised in my book, The Cathars Return, Lifting the Curse of Rome, which will be coming out soon. I've got a group on Facebook, it's the largest Cathar group on Facebook actually, The Cathars Return, Lifting the Curse of Rome. Yeah, you know a little bit about that. Essentially, what I was shown was that these people that came and then were brutally murdered, burnt at the stake in front of their families, and it's just horrendous what went on. It's just very difficult to imagine the severity and awfulness of it. And it was in a way a precursor to the Spanish Inquisition that happened, subsequent years. These people have reincarnated. They were actually a weave into the Earth's life wave of a purer type of person, an angelic person. Angel just means messenger of infinite intelligence or messenger of God. They're a weave into the human life wave of the angelic. These people have now come back, incarnated on the planet to really help shift the global paradigm from separation, suffering, pain, sorrow, to global peace, harmony, compassion, etc. But they need help. So their light bodies were damaged when they were burned alive, when they had their torturous deaths. They carry the karma of their brothers and sisters. It was an awful end, and I was given the job to clean up their light bodies. So these angelic beings gave me a technology to do that. And my healing abilities were already quite well known and quite advanced because of a whole series of other things that had happened to me the previous 20 plus years. But 6 weeks after this event, I was given another 1,000 rays of healing, and my goodness, the Cathars poured into my clinic.
So we're talking about reincarnation.
Reincarnated cancer. I'd see people burning when I was on the bed, and there'd be certain points like the inside of the right leg, there'd be a special point I'd touch and it'd literally hit the roof. It's where they used to put a hot lance in the leg and torture them. And I mean, I could go on and on and on. There's a whole program, a documentary series just about all the experiences with reincarnated Cathars. Just coming back to your original point, what do? I mean, I go with the flow, Anthony. I teach people to try and do their best to maintain connection with nature, to maintain connection with their true environment, because we do get subjugated by the programming, the pharmaceutical industry, the religious heterodoxy, the politics, our peers, the marketing, all this stuff project on us on how we should be, and we will only be happy if we look like this, if we dress like this, if we eat this, and the rest of the rubbish that they chuck out at us. I was one of those people that said, hang on a minute, this doesn't feel right. I don't know what's right, but I know this isn't right. So I was one of those people they call one of the indigo children. I wanted to destroy the old way. It's not working. So I shot from the hip, and a lot of people got upset in the process. Now I've settled down a bit. I've got 4 kids, I'm 54 years old. However, the passion still burns within me because I can see and feel and know the world could be a much better place if we make a few changes.
Absolutely. And yeah, I mean, you certainly don't look 54. And I know a lot of what you talk about is a bit out there for a lot of people. But actually, I know you've helped a lot of people. There's a lot of people that we know together, and the word on the street is that you are phenomenal. And so how can people reach you?
Well, depends what they want.
Okay.
I've got the London Reiki School where I teach people different types of healing. So Yusui Reiki, Karuna Reiki, harmonic resonance healing, psychic surgery, tarot, the rest of it, lots and lots of things. So that's one way they can reach me, www.londonreikischool.com. Lighttherapyrevolution.com is my clinic, so that's the easiest way to get hold of me, www.lighttherapyrevolution.com, where I have light frequency, light therapy, tachyon, Reiki, etc. Lots and lots of other modalities, also counselling. I have clients on every continent of the globe now, so a lot of people come to me for Skype. I do readings, I tune in, I help them, and I can heal them remotely as well, or help them heal themselves actually. I don't get caught up in it myself, I just do the transmissions and share with them what I feel, the lessons they may need to look at, and because it's not about instant fix, it's about helping people become empowered, not becoming dependent on me. I'm just a catalyst, Anthony, a humble little catalyst that's given a job because I'm man enough to want to do it, or man enough to be able to do it. And then the other thing is I do global retreats. So I've got a retreat in France next month for 2 weeks, where I teach people harmonic resonance 1, harmonic resonance 2. I go back to the land of the Cathars on a portal that I was prophesied to find 2014. I found it in 2 days when I flew out the end of 2014. It's a interdimensional gateway that is amazing. It's none of the usual places, they told me. So it's not at Montségur, it's not at Rennes-le-Château, it's not at Carcassonne, but it is near Pouvert in the south of France, which is about 40 kilometres from Carcassonne. It is going to be an amazing retreat. If people want to have a life-changing transformation and experiencing the real stuff, please contact me, info@simonhinton.com.
Simon, it's been an absolute pleasure. On behalf of everybody at BU Evolution, thank you so much.
Thank you, Anthony. It's been lovely to be here.
I'm sure we'll do many more.
And I just want to say also to you, Anthony, it's great that people like you are coming forward and actually dedicating their lives to sharing new stuff for the world, because we need as many people like you, Anthony, as we can get. People waking up, are seeing it every day, saying there's got to be a better way. Anthony, there is a better way, and you and I are on the path to finding it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.